Well, for all their public statements in support of feminism and gender equality, the left have developed a weird passion recently, an inconsistent one, destroying girls' sports by making girls compete with biological men. Florida Republican Congressman Greg Steube has introduced a bill into the House that would bar schools from using Title IX federal funds to support women's sports if biological men are allowed to compete in them. It makes sense. It's not a woman's sport if men are competing, right? And as recently as 15 years ago, that idea would have been too obvious to require a federal law. But today it has no chance of passing thanks to Democrats' control of the House. Congressman Steube joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah,
and
thanks
you get
so much for having me.
Common Sense Award for sponsoring legislation that you'd think we wouldn't need. What is the argument against this?
The argument against this is you're discriminating against people who identify as a woman that day and want the ability to compete. It's just fascinating that we're at this place in our country where you have to file bills to make it clear that women are actually going to be competing with women in women's sports.
What's so striking is that this is one of those phenomena where there is an identifiable group of victims, and it's the girls. It's the people Title IX was passed to protect, and they are suffering. They say they're suffering, and this is not speculation. Rare feminists have been brave enough to stand up and say this. How can people who pretend they're feminists, that they're carrying the torch for women, support something that hurts girls?
I don't know. And what's fascinating is even people who certainly aren't conservative, like Martina Navratilova, who is a great tennis great, she supports this legislation and was against the bill that the Democrats pushed, the ERA bill, because it redefined women's sports and allowed men to compete in women's sports. And so you even have people on the other side of the aisle that are going, hold on a second, this doesn't make sense. We are completely eroding what women's sports are if we're going to allow biological men to compete with women in women's collegiate activities.
None of this is an attack on anyone, on transgender people or anything like that. It's merely saying that girls are hurt when we allow this to happen. Were there any, and it's obvious, and everyone knows it, and it's only because of the bullying from lunatics online that no one's brave enough to say it out loud. Are there any Democrats, do you believe, who would support the legislation you're sponsoring?
Well, I filed pretty much what my bill is as an amendment on the ERA legislation that went through the Judiciary Committee, and not a single Democrat voted for it. We did it as a motion to recommit on the floor of the House on similar legislation, and I believe there was only 1 or 2 Democrats that voted for it. That's the sad state of affairs that we are in today, where you're destroying women's sports, and Democrats aren't willing to stand for women in women's sports.
Yeah, so after like a million years, we're redefining gender out of existence? That can't have bad consequences. We'll be judged for this because this is too nuts, actually, I think. Congressman, great to see you.
Great to see you.